going to move on to the pandemic now, but certainly some of the people analytics practitioners I've been talking to recently, some of the research they've been doing in their own organizations during the pandemic is this importance around focus time, which I guess is, as what you're saying, getting that rhythm right. So yes, we know that we're going to be doing lots of calls via Zoom and Teams and other platforms, but we also need to have that focus time to get our work done effectively, because we know that if we get interrupted continually, we're not going to be able to do that, or we're going to stress and work long hours. So it's quite interesting, which I think leads quite nicely onto some of the research that you've done in the pandemic. I think I'm certainly not going to try and predict the future after the events of this year. I think it's fraught with challenges. I think it's fairly safe to assume, though, that the crises of 2020 have fast-forwarded many aspects of the future of work, if we can use the inverted commas around that title. And I know that you've been involved in some research associated with the largest remote working experiment in history. And I think you framed that initially around what the impact working from home had on productivity and creativity. And I know that research was published in the summer. It'd be great to share some of those key findings, I think, with listeners here, those that haven't read it, and maybe if you've been doing more research since, how those findings have developed.
To take a step back, this is work, all the work I've described actually is with many different fantastic collaborators. In this case, I joined up with Haley Blunden at HBS, Andrew Brodsky and Wandon Sohn at UT Austin Combs School of Business, and Ben Weber, who's an old-time friend and the CEO of Humanize. We mentioned sociometric badges. He was one of the people boots on the ground when Sandy and the group were first creating those media labs at MIT. We got together and looked at some survey results. That was the starting point. And the survey that we've been running is unique, I think, in the following way. We've been asking people, not really a representative sampling, but a diverse sampling of people in the United States who've been working from home every 2 weeks, the same set of questions since they began working at home. Because of the pandemic. And we have we started with 600. It's come down a bit since then, but at least the original work was with 600 people, roughly half women, half men, half of them married, a third of them have children, about 40% managers, 60% individual contributors, again, all working virtually. And we asked them, this was nothing like new or novel, all the normal stuff: job satisfaction, work engagement, perceptions of own performance, how they rated their conflicts with colleagues, stress, negative. What made this interesting was not the questions we asked. What made this interesting was the context in which we asked them and the longitudinal nature of them. And then we paired that data and continue to pair that data with data that Ben is collecting from various organizations that are sociometric in nature. So not just what people perceive, but actually how they are working, what their interactions are like digitally, because it's not in person, digitally over the course of the same amount of time. And then we interviewed some leaders too. And that combination of data led to some interesting findings that I summarized. There are 3 curves. And so here are the 3 curves. There is we sort of optimistically named this the "we can do this" curve. I realize we're now in December. It feels a little bit less optimistic, although work-wise it has been. Employee stress, negative emotions, task conflict, all steadily falling since virtual work began. People have figured out how to do this, and they framed it. We also ask an open-ended question, so we get a lot of interesting qualitative responses. People say, I've been taking my Zoom skills to the next level. We're figuring out how to do this. It's starting to feel like business as usual. It's weird how normal everything has become. The virtual meetings, the emails, everyone looking grungy, whatever it is. And these are their own quotes. They've gotten into the groove of working from home.
Yeah.
And they actually, many of them say they love it.
Yeah.
And that's this "we can do this" curve. So that's one. The second curve, to pick up on what we're all still hoping to see in the economy, is the V curve. This idea that we dive down and bounce back up.
Yeah.
And job satisfaction and engagement both followed that path. So people felt less engaged and less satisfied sharply after 2 weeks of working virtually, but it recovered almost as sharply after that. And we've seen it basically plateau and not go back down. There are little blips here and there that I think at this point might be more due to the news cycles on the pandemic, that it is due perhaps to the workplace effects themselves. But they have recovered. And, it took, one person said it took some time to get used to it and for things to go right. It was a learning process, but they actually said, we got into a rhythm. I was so happy when I see that word after my own work. But this is the, finding the rhythm.
Yeah.
And then the third curve, which looks really boring, but to me is just as interesting, if not more so, and I think the same is true of you, is the flat line. So people have consistently rated their perceptions of own performance roughly unchanged.
Yeah, interesting.
Now, in part, that's because, as Ben finds, workdays are 10 to 20% longer, and we're just doing everything we possibly need to do to keep that performance the same under stress of the world and all that it means for our jobs. And that stress is harder for people with kids and not as hard for people with spouses. All these things are highly predictable.
Yeah.
But if you think of the combination of those things, it's actually a pretty good story for us, at least on average. And if I disaggregate it a little bit more, and then I'll pause, David, because I've gone through a lot of results at once. Although I get very excited by this because I think it offers us both a spirit and a path forward for how work might change and might have been accelerated by the last 9 months. There may be lots of silver linings here. But interestingly, we thought, well, the introverts will love this and the extroverts won't. And by and large, that was insignificant. We did not find a distinction there, because remember, we asked all sorts of personality traits. But people who were more agreeable on the traditional measure of agreeableness did much better in adapting to the pandemic work. People who are more narcissistic did much worse. And so that tells us a little bit about how this new future of work might evolve, given who we're favoring and who we're not in this particular way. Last thing, David, and then I really will let you in. For those who aren't watching the video, you can see David sitting here nodding, smiling, so he's encouraging me to keep going. But communication, because we talked about this rhythm before. Strong tie communication, people that we knew well, we're communicating roughly 40% or more with, not less. We're actually communicating more with those people who we need to communicate with to get the basic functions of our job done, or with whom we've already had strong ties. Weak ties are down. Communication is down at least 10%, probably much more than that at this point. And Ben's concern, and I echo it, on that is much of the work that's been done using people analytics shows that organizational health in the long term drives from the weak tie networks that provide unique and novel information to us in the short term. And so it very well may be that we have a challenge for creativity, a challenge for innovation, a challenge for information and knowledge generation and learning in the next 18 months, because we've underinvested in the weak ties in these 9 months that would lead us to do well then. And that's a cautionary tale from all of it.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice, and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.